On the world's geopolitical chessboard, some moves are loud and designed to capture global attention. We see the missiles streaking across the night sky, the warships cutting through contested waters, and we hear the fiery declarations from world leaders. These are the moves that dominate headlines and fuel the 24-hour news cycle. But often, the most dangerous moves, the ones that can truly upend the global order, happen in silence. They aren't made with gunpowder, but with currencies, not with destroyers, but with financial contracts. Right now, a major military crisis is unfolding in the most critical energy choke point on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. But behind the smoke and mirrors of this conflict, a different kind of move is being made. It's a quiet ultimatum, a secret negotiation that could fundamentally rewrite the rules of economic power that have governed the world for over 50 years. It isn't just another regional conflict, but a story about the weaponization of trade, the birth of a new financial alliance, and a calculated plot to dethrone the one thing that underpins America's global dominance, the United States dollar. Behind the headlines of drones and military drills in the Strait of Hormuz, a secret economic war is being waged. While the world watches the ships, they're missing the real story. Iran, reportedly backed by a coalition of nations, has delivered a quiet ultimatum that has nothing to do with weapons and everything to do with money. It is reportedly demanding that oil passing through this critical choke point no longer be paid for in US dollars, but in Chinese yuan. It isn't just a trade deal, it's a calculated shot in a plan to challenge the very foundation of American economic power. To understand the sheer gravity of this secret pact, you first have to understand the story that everyone thinks is happening. Since late February 2026, the Persian Gulf has been a tinderbox. The mainstream narrative is one of escalating military conflict, which began with joint U.S.-Israeli strikes against Iran that resulted in the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. In response, Iran unleashed a barrage of retaliatory missile and drone attacks, targeting its adversaries and issuing a chilling warning to all maritime traffic in the region. The focal point of this crisis is the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow artery that connects the Persian Gulf to the world. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps issued a clear threat. Passage through the strait was prohibited, effectively holding the global energy supply hostage. The immediate impact was chaos. Shipping through the strait, which normally sees a constant flow of tankers, dropped to practically zero. Over 150 ships, carrying millions of barrels of oil and vast quantities of liquefied natural gas, LNG, anchored outside the strait, waiting and watching. Major shipping giants like Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd suspended their routes. And then there was the price of oil. As the lifeblood of the global economy appeared to be choked off, energy markets went into a panic. Brent crude, the global benchmark, surged. It blew past $100 and peaked at over $120 a barrel for the first time in years. Nations like Qatar, a major LNG exporter, faced the possibility of having to declare force majeure, a legal clause freeing them from delivery obligations due to circumstances beyond their control. That is the smokescreen, a classic geopolitical crisis. The world was watching a game of military brinkmanship, but in doing so, people were looking at the wrong chessboard. The real game, the one with far greater consequences, wasn't about warships. It was about the currency used to buy the cargo that those warships were supposedly protecting. While the world was distracted by the specter of war, something else was happening in quiet, undisclosed meetings. Sources, including a CNN report citing an Iranian security official, reported that Tehran began crafting a new, far more sophisticated strategy. It wasn't a blunt instrument like a total blockade. It was a scalpel designed to carve out the heart of American financial power. The proposal, now reportedly under negotiation with a coalition of non-Middle Eastern nations, is as simple as it is revolutionary. Iran will grant safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, but only for oil tankers whose cargo is bought and paid for in Chinese yuan. Let that sink in. It is no longer just a military blockade. It is an economic filter. It's a bouncer at the door of the world's most important energy club, and the price of entry is no longer the US dollar. That isn't just speculation. The first signs of this new strategy have already been observed. While the strait was considered closed, some ships were mysteriously getting through. Vessels flagged to India and Pakistan were spotted navigating unusual routes, hugging the Iranian coastline under the apparent approval of the Iranian government. Turkey and even a Saudi tanker bound for India were reportedly allowed to pass. That wasn't a random pattern. It was a signal. Access was no longer guaranteed by international law, but granted based on political alignment and, as the new proposal makes clear, economic compliance. It is the real story. Iran has transformed a military choke point into a financial one. It is leveraging its geographic advantage not just to disrupt oil flows, but to dictate the currency in which that oil is traded. It's a direct assault on the foundation of the dollar's global dominance, the petrodollar system. Forcing the sale of the world's most vital commodity in a currency other than the dollar is an act of asymmetric economic warfare. It's a move designed to prove that a nation, crippled by decades of U.S. sanctions, can still strike a devastating blow against the American economy without firing a single shot directly at the United States. And it's a plan that has found willing partners. To truly grasp the magnitude of what Iran is attempting, we have to take a quick trip back in time. We need to understand the deal that made the dollar king, a deal forged in crisis that has shaped the global economy for over half a century. For decades, after World War II, the world ran on the Bretton Woods system. The US dollar was pegged to gold, and other currencies were pegged to the dollar. The dollar was as good as gold. But by 1971, the economic pressures of war and domestic spending made this promise impossible to keep. President Richard Nixon made a stunning announcement. The United States was cutting the dollar's link to gold. This Nixon shock threw global finance into turmoil. Without gold, what gave the dollar its value? The answer would come from another crisis: oil. In 1973, Arab members of OPEC declared an oil embargo against the United States and its allies. Oil prices quadrupled. Gas lines snaked for blocks in America, and the world learned a powerful lesson about its dependence on Middle Eastern oil. Out of this chaos, American officials, led by Henry Kissinger, engineered a masterstroke. In 1974, they struck a pivotal deal with the biggest player in OPEC, Saudi Arabia. The terms were simple. The U.S. would provide military protection. In exchange, Saudi Arabia would price all of its oil exports exclusively in U.S. dollars and invest its surplus profits, billions of petrodollars, back into U.S. government debt. Soon, other OPEC nations followed suit, and the petrodollar system was born. Gold was replaced by oil as the bedrock of the dollar's value. Think about it. If any country wanted to buy oil, it first had to buy U.S. dollars. It created a massive, permanent, artificial global demand for American currency. This system granted the United States what's famously been called an exorbitant privilege. It meant America could run huge trade deficits, buying more than it sold, because the world was forced to take its paper dollars to buy oil. It could finance massive budget deficits by issuing debt that other countries were compelled to buy. It is the system that has underpinned American economic hegemony for 50 years. And this is the system that the pact in the Strait of Hormuz is designed to shatter. A plan this audacious requires more than one actor. It needs a group of players who all stand to gain from upending the status quo. The secret pact to dethrone the dollar isn't the work of Iran alone. It's an alliance of convenience. For Iran, this is a matter of survival and payback. For decades, Iran has been targeted by punishing economic sanctions, almost all enforced through the U.S. dollar-based financial system. The weaponization of the dollar isn't a theory in Tehran. It's a daily reality. This proposal is the ultimate act of defiance. By demanding yuan for oil, Iran creates a sanctions-proof channel to sell its primary export. Transactions in yuan, settled through China's payment system, CIPS, can bypass the Western-controlled SWIFT system and the U.S. Treasury's oversight. After the death of his father, Iran's new supreme leader has vowed to use the strait as a point of leverage, and this is that threat made manifest. If Iran is the catalyst, China is its ultimate beneficiary. As the world's largest oil importer, China is forced to conduct its energy trade in the currency of its main geopolitical rival, thereby exposing its economy to U.S. policy and sanctions risks. For over a decade, China has pursued a methodical strategy to internationalize its currency, the yuan. This Hormuz Pact could accelerate that strategy by years. by making the yuan the only currency accepted for passage through the world's most important oil choke point. The plan could force major energy importers to acquire and hold yuan in their reserves. It perfectly aligns with China's broader efforts within the BRICS bloc to de-dollarize by settling more trade in local currencies and building alternative financial infrastructure, such as the CIPS system. The most intriguing element is the rumored coalition of 8 countries in negotiations with Iran. Their identities remain secret, but their motives are clear. They represent a growing group of nations, particularly in the global south, that are tired of the dollar-centric system. For these countries, dollar dominance is a source of instability. When the U.S. Federal Reserve raises rates, it strengthens the dollar, making it more expensive for them to service debt and pay for imports. The weaponization of the dollar through sanctions has also sent a chill through the international community, as nations worry their reserves could be frozen. This coalition is likely betting that the petrodollar system is in decline, and that by aligning with this new axis, they can secure their energy needs while gaining financial sovereignty. How would this pact actually function on the high seas? It's a system blending naval power with financial technology, relying on 3 key components: managed access, financial verification, and geography. First, this is a system of managed access, not a full blockade. Ships from countries that play by the new rules get a green light. Those who don't are denied passage. We're already seeing evidence of this, with compliant ships from certain nations being guided through an unusual channel that hubs the Iranian coast, firmly under the watch of the IRGC Navy. One lawmaker even claims some vessels are paying fees of up to $2 million for passage. The second component is financial verification. How does Iran know if a tanker's cargo was traded in yuan? That is where China's cross-border interbank payment system, or CIPS, comes in. A ship approaching the strait could be required to transmit proof of its transaction, showing the oil purchase was settled via CIPS. Iranian authorities could cross-reference this data, essentially requiring a financial passport for entry. The third component is the geography itself. The Strait of Hormuz is a natural choke point, only a few miles wide in places. That makes it incredibly easy for Iran to monitor and control with its swarm of fast attack boats, land-based missiles, and drones. The real leverage comes from the importers. Asian economies are overwhelmingly dependent on Hormuz, with an astounding 89% of the oil flowing through the strait destined for Asia. That is the cynical genius of the plan. It squeezes America's allies and its chief rivals' trading partners, while having a minimal direct impact on the U.S. oil supply. It forces Asia to choose: stick with the dollar and risk an energy crisis, or switch to the yuan and secure the flow of oil. If this plan is successful, it could trigger a domino effect that permanently alters the global financial landscape. The short-term consequences are already clear: chaos in energy and shipping markets. A sustained period of managed access based on currency would create a 2-tiered global oil market: a more expensive, less reliable market for those using the dollar, and a preferential market for those who have switched to the yuan. That would create immense economic pressure on countries like Japan and South Korea, which are staunch U.S. allies. The midterm consequences are where the real de-dollarization dynamic kicks in. If major economies are forced to buy oil in yuan, their central banks will have to start holding significant quantities of yuan in their reserves. You can't spend a currency you don't have. That would mark a pivotal shift. For 50 years, the primary reason central banks held dollars was to buy oil. If that reason is even partially removed, the pillar supporting the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency begins to crumble. It would create a feedback loop. As more countries hold and use the yuan, it becomes more attractive, further reducing the dollar's role. It is the network effect that protected the dollar for so long, now working in reverse. The long-term consequences are the most profound. A weakening demand for the dollar would make it much harder and more expensive for Washington to finance its massive national debt, which passed the $39 trillion threshold days ago. For the average American, this could mean higher costs for imported goods and higher borrowing costs for mortgages and loans. The ability of the United States to live beyond its means, a privilege funded by the dollar's global role, would come to an end. Furthermore, it would severely curtail America's ability to project power through sanctions. The world would shift from a unipolar financial system controlled by the U.S. to a multipolar one. It isn't just a financial shift, it's a geopolitical power shift of the highest order. Of course, the United States would not stand idly by. Washington could respond with more sanctions or increased military escorts, but each move carries immense risk, potentially leading to a direct military confrontation that could be even more destabilizing. What we are witnessing is more than just another flare-up in the Middle East. The headlines show missiles and warships, but the real battle is being fought on financial ledgers and in the code of payment systems. The events unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz are not a random act of aggression. They are a calculated, strategic move. It's a plan to transform geography into a weapon, to turn an economic toll booth where the only accepted currency is the Chinese yuan. It represents the convergence of interests among a nation desperate to escape sanctions, a superpower eager to challenge the incumbent, and a world increasingly seeking an alternative to a financial system dominated by a single nation. The petrodollar system, the bedrock of American power for half a century, is facing its most direct challenge yet. It is not a prediction of an overnight collapse. The global financial system has immense inertia. But this is how major shifts begin, with a quiet, secret pact that changes the rules of the game. The question we must now ask is this the moment the world finally begins to pivot away from the dollar, marking the beginning of the end of an era of American dominance? Or is it a desperate gamble that will backfire? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.